You're a farmer. That farmer, first and foremost. You operate a 1,500-acre family farm in Illinois. Your goal is to feed the world, frankly.
That's kind of a big goal, but I mean, it's a goal to shoot for. But yeah, I mean, we think that there's a lot of things that can be done that aren't being done, or that can be done better. And the biggest challenge, I think, with feeding people in most of the places we work, not in the United States, but outside the United States, is how do you reach that at scale? I mean, that's usually the big challenge.
You've traveled the world, and one thing that really struck me that you write about in the book is that you talk about seeing farmers in developing countries who could not feed themselves. How much of a turning point was that for you?
You know, when you think about that, there's tens of millions of farmers that can't feed their families. You know, that's just wrong. You don't have the infrastructure, you don't have the political leadership, you have corruption, you don't have the governance you need to do it. You don't have, a huge part of it is you don't have the knowledge, and you don't have a way to distribute the knowledge. So there's a whole host of issues that these farmers come up against. But that's what makes it so challenging to try to deal with it.
You also write extensively in this book, both of you, about conflict zones and hunger, and just how much you see the connection between the two in war zones. Have you seen anything that works in conflict zones?
There are things that work, but what we've learned is that you can't wait for the conflict to end. So one of the most important things you can do is find the small or large, but find the investments that you can make at the time that things are not stable, and they'll lead to stability. You know, one of the things we're trying to show and what we're doing in Eastern Congo is don't wait until everything's great. You know, there are things you can do, and those things that you do actually contribute to trying to achieve the peace that you want to see occur.
What about you, Howie? I mean, you talk about seeing it full circle. I mean, you worked for the government, focusing on agriculture in places like this that need it most. What's your takeaway? What can work?
You've got 3/4 of the world's poor around the world that live in rural areas where agriculture is the #1 activity. And we also know that by investing in that development, they're 3 times more likely to lift themselves out of poverty. And we saw this on the ground in Afghanistan when we were there. We worked very closely. We spent over a year in a specific community in Western Afghanistan working with the farmers, understanding exactly what it is that they needed and what their hopes were. And over time, we were able to provide them with the linkages that they were missing so that they could grow better crops, they could get those crops to market, they could have more income and economic stability for what they needed for their families and their community, and that they would have the long-term infrastructure to do it for generations to come.
Looking at what they've done with the money that you've given them, is it working? Is it paying off? Is the return on investment coming through?
Yeah. Well, on my 82nd birthday, I doubled the commitment, and I wouldn't have done that unless I felt terrifically about what they're doing. They're tackling tough things. I mean, they could go out and, you know, have a hospital wing or do something with a library or something like that. They are tackling real problems, and they're tackling problems that most people don't want to tackle.
Howard, you once said, talking about your father, "It seems nothing I could do would be as successful as what he did." So I'll ask you, Warren, how would you rate his success?
Oh, I would rate his and the other 2 children as absolutely successful. You don't measure it by money. You measure it by really living up to your potential and affecting others. And I think Howie has done I don't think anybody can do a better job at what he's working at, and I think what he's working at is enormously important. So it doesn't get any better than that.
And you've said that our children could have done nothing. They had enough money to frankly do nothing.
Yeah, frankly, they weren't brought up that way, and they work harder than I do.
Really?
Yeah.
You work harder than Dad?
He works pretty hard. That's a high benchmark. But there isn't a day I don't get out of bed and I'm excited about what I get to do.